"Don't call me right now. I'm in a meeting." My father's voice came through sharp, impatient, like I was interrupting something important, something that couldn't wait. I stood there for a second, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty line after he hung up. Then I lowered it slowly, my fingers tightening just enough to feel the edge of the case against my palm. Because 10 feet in front of me, beneath the soft gold light of the hotel lobby, I was watching him walk in, with his hand resting on another woman's back. Not awkward, not hesitant, familiar. And suddenly the lie didn't need explaining anymore. The lobby of the Marriott in Scottsdale was the kind of place designed to make everything feel calm, expensive, controlled. Polished marble floors, tall glass windows that pulled the late afternoon sun inside and softened it into something almost forgiving. There was a quiet hum, rolling suitcases, low voices, the distant chime of the elevator. None of it touched me. I stood near a column, half-shadowed, my uniform jacket folded over my arm instead of on my shoulders. I'd changed before coming in civilian clothes, neutral, forgettable. Habit. In the military, you learn quickly when to be seen, and when not to be. My mother stood a few feet behind me. I didn't turn around, but I could feel her there, still, silent. We hadn't planned to speak. We didn't need to. My father approached the front desk with the same easy confidence I'd seen my entire life. Shoulders back, chin level, the kind of man people trusted without asking questions. He leaned slightly toward the receptionist, smiling in that familiar, practiced way, the one that used to make rooms open for him. The woman beside him laughed at something he said. It was a little too loud for the space, like she was trying to match his energy and overshot it. Younger than my mother, younger than him by at least 20 years. Her hand brushed his arm as she spoke. He didn't move away. That was the detail that settled it. Not the hotel, not the lie. The comfort. The way they moved around each other like this wasn't new. I exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. No rush of anger, no surge of disbelief. That part had already passed weeks ago, maybe longer. What I felt now was something else. Clarity. Behind me I heard the faint shift of fabric. My mother adjusting her stance maybe, or maybe just grounding herself the way I was. She had asked me to come with her, not to confront him, not to make a scene, just to see. "I don't need proof anymore," she had said that morning, her voice calm in a way that made me pay attention. "I just need to know if I'm done pretending." So we came. And now we knew. At the counter, my father handed over a credit card. I didn't need to see it closely to recognize it. We'd used that same card last Christmas. Same one my mother used for groceries, for birthdays, for the quiet, ordinary things that built a life. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around, didn't check his surroundings. Why would he? In his version of reality, I was back on base. My mother was probably at home. And this was separate, contained, safe. The receptionist typed something into her computer, then smiled up at him. Checking in. "Yes," he said easily. "Reservation under Carter." Carter. The name landed differently in my chest than I expected. Not painful, just distant. Like something I used to belong to. I shifted my weight slightly, just enough to keep them in view without drawing attention. Years of training made the movement instinctive. Observe, assess, stay still. The woman Emily, I would later confirm, leaned closer to him as the receptionist spoke again. Her voice dropped softer now, like they were already stepping into a more private world. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. I pulled my phone from my bag and glanced at the call log. His name still sat at the top, less than a minute ago. "I'm in a meeting." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so simple, so predictable. For years, my father had been the kind of man who explained everything. Detailed, precise. If he was late, there was a reason. If something didn't add up, he'd walk you through it until it did. Lately, it had changed. Short answers, delayed responses, conversations that ended just a little too quickly. At first, I told myself it was stress, work, age. Then I started noticing patterns. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. The receptionist reached for 2 key cards and placed them neatly on the counter. My father picked them up, his hand brushing hers in a brief, polite gesture, before he turned slightly toward the woman beside him. His hand returned to her lower back. Again natural, unthinking. Like it belonged there. I felt something shift inside me then. Not a break. That had happened earlier quietly over time. This was different. This was the moment something ended. They turned toward the elevators, walking side by side close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Neither of them looked around. Not once. The doors slid open with a soft chime. They stepped inside. And then they were gone. The lobby returned to itself almost immediately. A man on his laptop near the corner. A couple checking in behind where my father had just stood. The low music overhead steady and indifferent. Ordinary. That was what struck me most. How ordinary everything felt when nothing was. I stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the moment settle, not pushing it away, not rushing past it, just letting it exist. Then I turned. My mother met my eyes. There were no tears, no visible anger. Just a kind of quiet that I had never seen in her before, not empty, just resolved. "Well," she said softly. "That was it. No accusation, no question. Just acknowledgement." I nodded once. Yeah. We didn't hug, didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. After 30 years of marriage, whatever needed to be understood between them already was. I glanced back toward the front desk. The receptionist was still there organizing something behind the counter. In my bag I could feel the edge of the envelope, thick, sealed, prepared. We hadn't come here by accident. A week earlier my mother had sat across from a lawyer in a quiet office and said the words out loud for the first time. Not with anger, not with hesitation. Just clarity. "I'm done." Papers were drafted, documents gathered, accounts reviewed. Everything handled the way things should be handled when you're no longer reacting, but deciding. I stepped toward the front desk, slowly aware of my own breathing, steady and controlled. My mother followed just a step behind. The receptionist looked up as I approached. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She remembered me from earlier. "Hi," I said, offering a small, polite smile. "We spoke on the phone." She nodded, glancing briefly between me and my mother. "Yes, I remember." I reached into my bag and placed the envelope gently on the counter. "I'd like you to give this to Mr. Carter when he checks out." She hesitated. Just for a moment. Her eyes dropped to the envelope, then lifted back to my face, searching for something, doubt maybe. "There won't be a scene," I added quietly. "He won't even know until he's leaving." Another pause, a human one. Then she nodded. "All right. Thank you." I stepped back, giving her space, giving the moment room to settle into something final. As we turned toward the exit, I felt it again, that same steady, unfamiliar feeling from before. Not relief, not satisfaction. Control. For the first time in a long time, we weren't waiting for him to decide what happened next. We already had. Outside, the Arizona heat hit my skin dry and immediate. The sunlight felt sharper now, less forgiving. Real. I didn't look back. We didn't talk about revenge. Not once. If you had asked my mother what she was doing, she wouldn't have used that word. She would have said something simpler, something quieter. "I'm getting my life in order." And that's exactly what it looked like. No dramatic confrontations, no late-night arguments, no accusations thrown across the dinner table. From the outside, nothing changed. My father still left early for work. My mother still made coffee in the mornings. The house still carried the same rhythm it always had. But underneath that rhythm, everything was shifting. It started with paperwork. One afternoon while my father was at work, my mother sat at the dining table with a small stack of documents spread out neatly in front of her. Bank statements, credit card summaries, insurance papers, the kind of things people only organize when something important is coming. I sat across from her, not speaking, just watching the way she moved, careful, methodical, not rushed. "You don't have to do this alone," I said after a while. She glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. "I know." But she kept going. There was something about that moment that stayed with me, not because of what she was doing, but because of how she was doing it. There was no anger in her movements, no visible resentment, just focus. Control. A few days later, she met with a lawyer in Mesa. She didn't tell my father. She didn't tell anyone else either, just me. The first thing she asked me, my mother said that evening as we sat in the living room, was whether I wanted to fight or whether I wanted to finish. And I asked. She leaned back slightly, her hands folded loosely in her lap. I told her I didn't want a scene. That sounded like her. I just want it to be clear, she added. Clear. That word became the foundation of everything that followed. The lawyer explained the process community property law's asset division timelines. It was practical, structured, almost clinical. My mother listened to all of it without interruption. When it was over, she signed the initial documents with the same steady hand she used for everything else. No hesitation. After that, things moved quietly but quickly. Accounts were reviewed, copies were made, dates were noted. And then there was the envelope. It sat on the kitchen counter the first time I noticed it. Thick, sealed, unassuming. What's in it, I asked. Everything he needs to know, she replied. She didn't elaborate, she didn't have to. A few nights later, I asked her something I hadn't been able to shake. Why the hotel? She looked at me for a moment, considering the question. Because that's where he thinks he's in control, she said. I frowned slightly. He's careful at home, she continued. Measured. He knows how to manage what people see. But out there, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He's comfortable, and comfortable people don't hide as well as they think they do. That made sense. In the military, we were taught something similar. Patterns reveal truth, and people only maintain discipline for so long before they slip into habit. The hotel wasn't random. It was predictable. We didn't need to track him. We didn't need to follow him. All we had to do was wait for him to step into the version of his life he thought no one else could see. And then be there first. The day we drove to Scottsdale, neither of us said much. The highway stretched out ahead of us, sun reflecting off the asphalt in that dry Arizona way that made everything feel a little too bright. My mother kept both hands on the wheel, her posture steady, her expression neutral. You sure about this? I asked at one point. She didn't answer right away. Yes, she said finally. No doubt, no hesitation. Just certainty. We arrived at the hotel earlier than he did. That was intentional. My mother had called ahead, spoken to the receptionist, explained just enough to make the request without turning it into something dramatic. I don't want a scene, she had said. That part was important. The receptionist had hesitated, of course. It wasn't a typical request, but there was something in my mother's tone, calm, composed, unwavering, that made people listen. We'll do what we can, the woman had replied. That was all we needed. We waited in the lobby after that. Not hiding exactly, just present. Watching. Time passed in a way that felt both slow and precise. The kind of waiting where every detail becomes sharper. The sound of footsteps, the hum of conversation, the subtle shift of light across the floor. When he finally walked in, it wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. Everything after that moved exactly as planned. We didn't approach him, we didn't interrupt, we didn't make ourselves known. We let him check in. We let him believe his version of reality was intact. Because the plan was never to confront him in that moment. It was to let him carry the truth with him. To place it in his hands when he thought he was leaving untouched. Back in the present, after we handed the envelope to the receptionist, my mother and I walked out of the hotel side by side. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. She unlocked it, then paused with her hand on the door. For a long time, she said quietly, I thought I was waiting for him to choose. I leaned against the passenger side listening. To choose us, to choose this life. She shook her head slightly, but he already did. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just understanding. I just didn't want to admit it. I nodded once. That's the hardest part, I said. She looked at me, a small, almost tired smile forming. Not anymore. We got into the car after that, the air inside still warm from the sun. As she started the engine, I glanced back once, just once, toward the entrance of the hotel. People moved in and out like nothing had changed. Because for them, nothing had. But for us, everything had already shifted. We weren't reacting anymore. We weren't guessing. We weren't waiting. We had seen the truth. We had prepared for it. And now, we were simply letting it unfold. When he checked out later that evening, the lobby looked exactly the same. Same soft lighting, same quiet music, same polite rhythm of people moving in and out of a place that never really changed. The difference was him. I didn't see it happen. Not directly, but I could picture it clearly enough the moment the receptionist slid the envelope across the counter with a neutral smile, the way he would have taken it without thinking, assuming it was a receipt or a copy of something routine. And then, the pause. The slight shift in his posture as he realized the weight of it wasn't paper thin. The hesitation before opening it. And then the stillness that follows when something you didn't expect suddenly makes perfect sense. He wouldn't have made a scene. That wasn't who he was. Not in public. Not in a place where people could see. But something would have shown. A tightening in his jaw. A change in his breathing. That small involuntary reaction you can't control when your version of reality breaks open just enough to let the truth in. By the time he walked out of that hotel, he already knew. And for the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the narrative. The drive home from Scottsdale to Mesa usually takes about 20 minutes. That night I imagine it felt shorter. Not because he was calm, but because when something urgent settles into your mind, everything else disappears. Traffic, distance, time. It all collapses into a single thought. How do I fix this? By the time he pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the way he had left it that morning. Lights on in the kitchen, curtains slightly open, the familiar ordinary image of a life still in place. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that inside everything had already changed. My mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table when the front door opened. We didn't turn right away. We let him walk in. Footsteps faster than usual, slightly uneven, the sound of the door closing harder than necessary. Linda. His voice carried something I hadn't heard in a long time, not authority, not control. Uncertainty. My mother looked up first, not sharply, not dramatically, just steadily. "I'm here," she said. He stepped into the kitchen a moment later. I watched his face carefully. Years of training had taught me to read people, not just what they said, but what they tried to hide. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the scene. My mother at the table, me sitting beside her, the two of us together. Then the envelope in his hand. That's when the color in his face shifted. Not completely gone, not yet, but enough. "What is this?" he asked, holding it slightly up like the answer might be written on the outside instead of inside. My mother didn't respond immediately. She folded her hands in front of her, resting them lightly on the table. "It's exactly what it looks like," she said. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for the meaning to land. "Divorce papers," he said, the word catching slightly in his throat. "Yes." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. This is insane." I didn't move, didn't lean forward, just watched. "You had someone hand me divorce papers at a hotel," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "At a hotel." "It was private," my mother replied calmly. "No one made a scene." "That's not the point," he snapped. I spoke then. "It is the point." His eyes snapped toward me. "Excuse me." I held his gaze evenly. "You didn't want a scene, neither did we." Silence followed. He looked between us again, searching for something, confusion, doubt, hesitation. There wasn't any. "You're overreacting," he said finally, his tone shifting, trying to regain footing. "You don't have all the information." My mother tilted her head slightly. "Then give it to me." Another pause. This one longer. Because that's the problem with lies. They need details. And when the moment comes to provide them, there's usually nothing left. "It's not what you think," he said, softer now. I almost smiled, not out of amusement but recognition. "It's exactly what we think," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen like movement might help him find something to say. "She works with me," he said quickly. "It was a work trip, we had meetings." In a hotel room, I asked, my tone still calm. He stopped. "That's not—" "You told Mom you were in a meeting?" I continued, not raising my voice. "You were." He stared at me. "Just not the kind you thought you'd have to answer for." The words landed cleanly. No anger, no accusation. Just truth. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping a fraction. Not enough for most people to notice. But I did. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, finally, his voice quieter now. My mother nodded once. "I believe that," she said. For a second, something like hope flickered across his face. "But you did," she added. And just like that, it was gone. We sat there in the quiet for a moment. the weight of everything settling into the space between us. He looked down at the envelope again, then back at my mother. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "Over one mistake." That word one hung in the air. My mother glanced at me briefly, then back at him. "This didn't start at that hotel," she said. "That was just where it ended." He didn't respond. Didn't argue. Because deep down, he knew she was right. His gaze shifted around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time. The table, the counter, the small details of a life he had assumed would still be there no matter what he did. "What happens now?" he asked. It was the first honest question he had asked since walking in. My mother answered simply, "We move forward." "With lawyers?" "Yes." "And that's it," he pressed. "You just walk away from 32 years. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back up at him. "I walked away from it a while ago," she said quietly. That was the moment his composure broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just visibly. The realization that this wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. I stood then, pushing my chair back slowly. He turned toward me, his expression shifting again, uncertain, searching. "You knew about this?" he asked. "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" I met his eyes steady. "I was waiting for you to tell the truth." He looked away first. That told me everything I needed to know. I picked up my bag from the counter. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To stay with Carol for a few days," my mother replied before I could answer. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that, or maybe like he was trying to catch up to a reality that had already moved past him. I paused near the doorway, then spoke one last time. "You said you were in a meeting," I said. He didn't respond. "You were," I continued. "You just didn't realize what was being decided." And then I walked out. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet sound of something ending, exactly the way it had been breaking all along. 8 months later, the mornings felt different. Not better in the way people expect, not brighter, not easier, but clearer. The kind of clear that comes when something stops pressing against you from the inside. My mother moved into a smaller place on the east side of Mesa. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a small patio that caught the morning sun just right. It wasn't the house I grew up in. It didn't have the same echoes, the same worn-in corners, the same history layered into every room. But it was quiet. And it was hers. The divorce itself wasn't dramatic. Arizona doesn't allow for much drama in that regard. Community property. Everything split down the middle, paperwork processed with a kind of efficiency that doesn't leave much room for emotion. There were meetings, signatures, conversations that stayed polite on the surface and avoided anything too personal underneath. My father didn't fight it, not the way I thought he might. Maybe he knew there wasn't much left to argue, or maybe for the first time in a long time he understood that control wasn't something he could reclaim by talking his way through it. We saw him a few times during the process. Short interactions, practical, focused on logistics. He looked different. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but there was something missing from the way he carried himself. That quiet certainty he used to have, the sense that he knew exactly how things would unfold. That was gone. In its place was something less defined. Hesitation, maybe, or awareness. One afternoon near the end of everything, we sat across from him in a conference room, neutral space, beige walls, a long table dividing the room into clean halves. He looked at my mother for a long moment before speaking. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. She nodded. Neither did I. That was it. No blame, no raised voices. Just 2 people acknowledging something that had already been over long before either of them said it out loud. After the divorce was finalized, my mother took a few weeks to settle into her new place. At first the silence felt unfamiliar, not heavy, just different. She had spent so many years adjusting to someone else's presence that being alone again felt like learning a new rhythm. Simple things took getting used to. Cooking, for one. Waking up in a bed that didn't shift beside her. Leaving the television off because there was no one else in the room to fill the space. But slowly those things changed. They stopped feeling empty. They started feeling peaceful. She picked up part-time work at a dental office nearby. Nothing demanding. Just enough to create structure to interact with people, to remind herself that her life extended beyond the roles she had carried for so long. The first day she went back, she called me afterward. "I forgot what it feels like," she said. "What?" To just be somewhere without thinking about anyone else. There was a lightness in her voice I hadn't heard in years. I returned to base not long after that. My work resumed its usual pace: early mornings, structured days, the kind of environment where clarity isn't optional. In the military, you don't get to ignore what's in front of you. You assess it, you respond to it, and you move forward. That's what this felt like. Not a victory, not a loss. Just forward. Sometimes late at night, when everything settled and the noise of the day faded, I thought about that moment in the hotel lobby. The way he had walked in, the way he had smiled, the ease in his movements, like he was stepping into a life he believed was separate from the one he had built. For a long time I tried to understand it. Not to excuse it, just to place it somewhere that made sense. But eventually I stopped trying. Because not everything needs to be understood in order to be accepted. And acceptance doesn't mean approval. It just means you stop waiting for something to change. My mother still calls me every few days. Sometimes we talk about practical things, appointments, work, the small details that fill a life. Sometimes we don't talk about anything at all. We just stay on the line, sharing the quiet in a way that feels enough. Once a few weeks ago, she asked me something that stayed with me. Do you think we were too calm about it? I considered the question. No, I said finally, I think we were clear. She was quiet for a moment. Yeah, she said softly, I think so too. Clarity doesn't always look like strength. It doesn't always come with loud decisions or visible change. Sometimes it looks like silence, like restraint, like choosing not to react in the ways people expect. But that doesn't make it weak. If anything, it makes it final. These days, her mornings start the same way. Coffee on the patio, the sun coming up over the rooftops, a small table just big enough for a mug and a book. Out of habit, she told me once, she still pours 2 cups sometimes. She'll stand there for a second looking at both of them. Then she'll smile a little, pour one back into the pot and sit down. Because I only need one now, she said. There was no sadness in it. Just truth. As for my father, we don't talk much, not out of anger, not out of punishment, just distance. Some things don't end with a single moment. They fade, gradually, until what's left is something quieter, more defined. He still has his life, his work, whatever version of things he chose to step into. But it exists without us now. And that was his decision. We didn't take anything from him. We just stopped protecting the version of him that didn't exist anymore. If you've ever found yourself holding on to something out of habit, out of history, out of the hope that it might return to what it used to be, you already know how hard it is to let go. But there's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize you're not holding it anymore. You're just standing there. And for the first time in a long time, you're standing on your own. If this story stayed with you, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever reached a point where silence said more than words ever could? Let me know in the comments below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories that remind us what it means to choose ourselves, even when it's hard. So if you're still here, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep walking this path together.